What's up, guys? Welcome to the line change. In this video, we are going to be talking about Elias Pettersson once again. Obviously, a lot of people are talking about him the last several days, or ever since that interview that he did, where he mentioned he wanted revenge. Now, in this video, we're not going to be talking about that particular part, as we already did that, but we are going to be talking about something else in regards to Elias Pettersson, and that is the myth of Elias Pettersson piling up points against weak opposition. I found an article that talks about this, and I thought it was very intriguing. And I figured a lot of people are talking about Elias Pettersson right now. Why not continue that conversation about Elias Pettersson and get into something else? But before I do that, I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to my sponsor, Gassy Jack Art, maker of that incredible artwork you see there behind me. And you guys can check them out yourselves at gassjackart.com. You can also find him on Instagram at gassjackart. I have a link to his website in the description down below as well for you guys to check out. But let's go ahead and dive right into this article. Of course, brought to us by our friends at Canucks Army. And it goes on to say, busting the myth of Elias Pettersson piling up points against weak opposition. This article is written by Stefan Roget. And it goes on to say, objectively speaking, Elias Pettersson has not played as well recently as he has in the past. Beyond that, fans of the Vancouver Canucks have ample subjective reasoning to critique Pettersson's recent play, or even to have lost faith in him as a player. But even when some criticism is warranted, there's a clear difference between subjective opinions and statements of objective truth. And there's a certain notion about Pettersson that we've heard frequently repeated recently as a truth, but that should be measurable objectively one way or another. The notion is this: Elias Pettersson has traditionally racked up his points against weaker opponents and has struggled to score against more high-quality opposition. In other words, he supposedly feasts on cellar dwellers and wilts against contenders, the classic mark of a paper tiger. Upon hearing that notion shared a few times of late in our comment section and elsewhere, it didn't strike us as particularly true, but true or false, it's a checkable thing, so let's check. Here's our methodology. We broke down Pettersson's career scoring record against each and every NHL opponent. The quality of those opposing teams has varied over Pettersson's 7-year career to this point, so we'll also include a note on how often that team has made the playoffs since Pettersson first arrived in the NHL. And since then, there's still plenty of distinction to be had between playoff appearances and overall quality of competition. We'll offer up a little bit of additional commentary throughout and some concrete conclusions at the end as we firmly bust this recurring myth. Let's take a look at the team-by-team breakdown. Now we're going to go in alphabetical order. So here is Pettersson's regular season scoring record against each NHL opponent, along with a note on how often that team has made the playoffs during Pettersson's career. We're going to start off with the Anaheim Ducks. And the number of playoff appearances since 2018 is 0 out of 7. For EP40 against the Anaheim Ducks, he has played 20 games, 7 goals, 13 assists, 20 points, and he is a 1.00 point per game. The Ducks have ranged between awful and really awful throughout much of Pettersson's career. Appropriately enough, he's gone point per game against them over the long term, and that hasn't changed as the Ducks have very recently got better. As you read this list, you'll find that this performance is just a little above average. Pettersson's overall point per game rate is 0.97. Let's take a look at the Boston Bruins. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 6 out of 7 years. EP40 versus the Boston Bruins, 11 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points, and a point per game of 0.27. This makes us wish we hadn't gone alphabetically. The Bruins are by far Pettersson's worst opponent of all time, with just 3 points in 11 games. There are always outliers, and we'll note that this is a fairly extreme outlier. His next lowest scoring rate against any one team is a 0.60 rate against Tampa Bay, which is still more than double this Boston rate. Don't worry, the trend evens out past this point. Let's take a look at the Buffalo Sabres. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 0 out of 7. EP40 versus the Buffalo Sabres, 11 games played, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points, and a 0.82 point per game. As a franchise with the longest playoff drought in the league, one would expect Buffalo to be one of those teams that Pettersson, but that's not the case. His scoring rate against the Sabres has been a little bit behind his overall career pace. Let's take a look at the Calgary Flames. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 3 out of 7. EP40 versus the Calgary Flames, 29 games played, 14 goals, 17 assists, 31 points. He is a 1.07 point per game. There is no opponent that Pettersson has played or scored against more than the Calgary Flames. This is due to the Flames being one of two teams, Edmonton being the other, that have been in the Canucks division for each year of Pettersson's career, including that pandemic-driven all-Canadian division year. The Flames were a much better team when Pettersson started out, too, before they lost Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk in the same summer. Take a look at the Carolina Hurricanes. Number of playoff appearances since 2018. They have made the playoffs every year, 7 out of 7. And Pettersson versus the Carolina Hurricanes, 12 games, 5 goals, 6 assists, 11 points. And he is a point per game of 0.92. The Hurricanes are one of the few teams to have made the playoffs in every season of Pettersson's career thus far. They've been legitimate contenders in most of them. For his part, Pettersson is just 1 point off being point per game against the team that, if rumors are true, he was once almost traded to. Let's take a look at the Chicago Blackhawks. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 1 out of 7. EP40 versus the Chicago Blackhawks, 18 games played, 7 goals, 10 assists, 17 points, and he is a 0.94 point per game against them. Here's a good contrast that points to the error in the myth we're busting. The Blackhawks have been one of, if not the worst, performing teams since Pettersson arrived in the league, and yet his scoring rate against them is nearly identical to his rate against the Hurricanes, who have been one of the best teams in the league since his arrival. Let's take a look at the Colorado Avalanche. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 7 out of 7. EP40 versus the Colorado Avalanche, 16 games played, 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points. He is a 0.81 point per game. There has been one singular class of the Western Conference since Pettersson began his career. It's probably Colorado, and this is one contending team that Pettersson has struggled to score against, relatively anyway, at 3 points behind a point per game rate. Let's take a look at the Columbus Blue Jackets. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 2 out of 7. And EP40 versus the Blue Jackets, 11 games, 10 goals, 6 assists, 16 points, and he is a 1.45 point per game. The Blue Jackets have been a mixed bag throughout the past 7 years, oscillating between the basement and the playoff fringe. If someone wanted to point out a single example of Pettersson, quote-unquote, feasting on a weaker team, this is probably it. Columbus is the opponent against whom he has achieved his second highest scoring rate. Let's take a look at the Dallas Stars. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 7 out of 7. And Elias Pettersson has played 16 games against them, 6 goals, 9 assists, 15 points, and is a 0.94 point per game. If the class of the Western Conference hasn't been the Colorado Avalanche, it's been the Dallas Stars. Though they've made the playoffs and been in contention for essentially Pettersson's entire career, he's still just a single point below a point per game status against them. This is one of Pettersson's most encouraging results in truth. Let's take a look at the Detroit Red Wings. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 0 out of 7. And Elias Pettersson has played 12 games against them, 5 goals, 13 assists, 18 points, and is a 1.50 point per game. The Red Wings are Pettersson's preferred opponent with a whopping 1.50 point per game all-time record against them. They're also a bit of a tough team to gouge in terms of their challenge level. Surely they've missed the playoffs in each of the past 7 years. They've often spent that time in the mushy middle and have certainly been more competitive since Steve Yzerman took over. In other words, they're not the traditional cellar dweller that Pettersson has been accused of dominating, even if they are a weaker club overall. Let's take a look at the Edmonton Oilers. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 6 out of 7. Elias Pettersson has played 25 games against the Oilers, 7 goals, 14 assists, 21 points, and is a 0.84 point per game. Naturally, the Oilers are Pettersson's second most frequent opponent after Calgary. Though his scoring rate against them isn't quite as high, the Oilers look to be Pettersson's toughest Pacific opponent for whatever reason, though we're only really talking about a matter of a few points or decimal places. Let's take a look at the Florida Panthers. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 6 out of 7. Elias Pettersson has played 11 games against the Florida Panthers, 2 goals, 8 assists, 10 points, and has a 0.91 point per game. If one is scouring this list for optimism, they've got to like this. The Florida Panthers are verging on a modern-day dynasty, and yet Pettersson has almost gone point per game against them too, and is just the slightest smidgen below his career average. For those asking, what have you done for me lately? Pettersson has 5 points in his last 5 games against Florida specifically. Let's take a look at the Los Angeles Kings. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 4 out of 7. Pettersson has played 21 games, 9 goals, 12 assists, 21 points, and is a 1.00 point per game. Another Californian opponent, another perfect point per game record. And spoilers, that's not the last time either. For whatever reason, Pettersson has a 7-year trend of going exactly point per game against the opposition from the Golden State. It's actually a little weird. In any case, of the trio, the Kings have been clearly the best over the past 7 years. Minnesota Wild. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 5 out of 7. 16 games played, 7 goals, 5 assists, 12 points, and a 0.75 point per game. Back in the day, one would expect every player to have lower scoring stats against the stifling Wild. They don't really carry that reputation anymore, but for whatever reason, they're a team that Pettersson has had a bit of trouble scoring against with just a point per game rate, a 0.75 point per game rate. They've always been in the playoff hunt, but rarely a true contender. Montreal Canadiens, number of playoff appearances since 2018, 3 out of 7. 16 games played, 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points, and a 0.69 point per game. Canadiens have turned around one of the quickest and most effective rebuilds in hockey, only bottoming out for a small handful of seasons before returning to the playoffs. Their bottoming out, however, coincides with the highest scoring seasons in Pettersson's career, which is why it's a bit odd to see him score so little against them. Let's take a look at the Nashville Predators. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 5 out of 7. Pettersson has played 17 games against them, 11 goals, 9 assists, 20 points, and is a 1.18 point per game. Don't judge the Predators by their measly results in 24-25. They've been a solid middle-of-the-road playoff team for most of their recent history, if never a true contender. Still, they're one of the teams Pettersson has scored the most against, just slipping into his top 5 point per game. Let's take a look at the New Jersey Devils. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 2 out of 7. Pettersson has played 10 games, 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points, and is a 0.80 point per game. Maybe it's all the familial drama, but the Devils are another team, and a weaker one at that, against whom Pettersson's scoring has dipped down below his usual career pace. New York Islanders, number of playoff appearances since 2018, 5 out of 7. 11 games played, 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points, and a 0.73 point per game. We're noticing a bit of a trend here in Pettersson's scoring being lowest against somewhat middle-of-the-road Eastern Conference teams, the Canadiens, the Devils, the Islanders, and coming up soon, the Flyers. We're not sure what it means, and we'll note that Eastern opponents naturally come with smaller sample sizes. The New York Rangers. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 4 out of 7. Pettersson has played 12 games, 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points, and is a 1.17 point per game. Seeing the Rangers only make the playoffs in 4 of 7 past seasons is a little surprising. In any case, Pettersson has played well against the Canucks' 94 rivals with over a point per game and nearly an assist per game at that. Ottawa Senators, number of playoff appearances since 2018, 1 out of 7. 15 games played, 10 goals, 12 assists, 22 points, and a 1.47 point per game. Pettersson has scored the most against the Canadiens or the Maple Leafs, but his Eastern Canadian road trips haven't been a total waste because the Senators are Pettersson's second best opponents. Technically, this would be another example of a weaker team that Pettersson has dominated, though it must be said that they've gotten better in each year of his career. Philadelphia Flyers. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 1 out of 7. 12 games played, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points, a 0.83 point per game. We mentioned that trend with middling Eastern Conference teams, and it continues with the Flyers. A 0.83 rate isn't awful by any stretch, and is just 2 points back of being point per game anyway, but it is interesting to note all the same. Pittsburgh Penguins, number of playoff appearances since 2018, 4 out of 7. 11 games played, 6 goals, 7 assists, 13 points, and a 1.18 point per game. The trend doesn't continue with the Penguins, a former dynasty that has been on the slow and steady decline since Pettersson arrived in the league. Matching up with the likes of Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, Pettersson has enjoyed one of his top 5 results against the Penguins. San Jose Sharks. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 1 out of 7. 22 games played, 7 goals, 15 assists, 22 points, and a 1.00 point per game. It is almost a little freaky. In 63 games against Californian opponents, Pettersson has scored exactly 63 points. In any case, there's little bragging to be done about scoring against the Sharks, specifically as they are one of those actually cellar-dweller franchises. Seattle Kraken. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 1 out of 4. 12 games played, 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points, and a 0.92 point per game. The Kraken have only been around for 4 of Pettersson's seasons, and he's scored at essentially his career pace against them thus far. In this case, one might have hoped for a little more feasting from Pettersson on a new geographical rival in the form of an expansion team. St. Louis Blues. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 5 out of 7. 17 games played, 6 goals, 18 assists, 24 points, and a 1.41 point per game rate. Pettersson's third best point per game rate comes against the Blues, a team that has ranged all the way from winning the Stanley Cup to missing the playoffs in Pettersson's 7-year career. If you want to pick out the best team that Pettersson has a dominant record against, the Blues are head and shoulders above the Red Wings and Senators. Tampa Bay Lightning. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 7 out of 7. 10 games, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points, a 0.60 point per game rate. Though he has scored against them at more than double the rate he has against Boston, the Lightning have been Pettersson's second toughest opponent. That said, the Lightning are really the only true contender we can find on this list that Pettersson has truly suppressed scoring numbers against, making it the exception that proves the rule or busts the myth in this case. The Toronto Maple Leafs. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 7 out of 7. 14 games played against, 13 goals, 8 assists, 11 points, a 0.79 point per game rate. If there was a team you wish Pettersson scored more against, it's probably the Leafs. For whatever reason, his scoring has lagged behind here. Perhaps it's the additional gravitational pressures of playing at the center of the hockey universe. The Utah Mammoth, formerly known as the Utah Hockey Club, and the Arizona Coyotes. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 1 out of 7. 16 games played, 7 goals, 11 assists, 18 points, a 1.13 point per game rate. For the purpose of the study, we think it's fair to lump the record of the Arizona Coyotes and the Utah Hockey Club / Mammoth together. We understand there's a technical distinction. In any case, they're an opponent against whom Pettersson has had slightly above average success, but only by a couple points over point per game. Let's take a look at the Vegas Golden Knights. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 6 out of 7. 18 games played, 7 goals, 10 assists, 17 points, a 0.94 point per game rate. As a franchise, the Vegas Golden Knights have only been around 1 season longer than Pettersson. They've been one of the top teams in the Western Conference for nearly their entire run of existence. If we're talking playoff-capable opponents, then Vegas is probably top of the list. Pettersson, however, has just barely missed out on point-per-game status against them and essentially matched his career pace. Let's take a look at the Washington Capitals. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 6 out of 7. 10 games played, 6 goals, 4 assists, 10 points, a 1.00 point per game rate. Kind of running out of commentary here, but Pettersson went point per game in his matchups with Alex Ovechkin to date, and that's pretty cool, no? Winnipeg Jets. Number of playoff appearances since 2018, 6 out of 7. 19 games played, 7 goals, 8 assists, 15 points, a 0.79 point per game rate. Those who were already going to use this list to confirm their biases anyway, here's one last contending team that Pettersson hasn't scored at a great rate against for the road. It's interesting to note that the Jets are one of just 2 Western Conference opponents, with the Wild being the other, that Pettersson has scored at a less than 0.80 rate against. Now let's all lump it all together, and Pettersson was best against the Red Wings with a 1.50 point per game rate. Second, the Ottawa Senators, a 1.47 point per game rate. Third is Columbus with a 1.45 point per game rate. Fourth is St. Louis with a 1.41 point per game rate. Tied for fifth is both Pittsburgh and Nashville each at a 1.18 point per game rate. This is a mixed bag of teams. You've got two occasional pseudo contenders in Nashville and St. Louis, a former great team on the decline in Pittsburgh, and three weaker, but not quite cellar dwelling over the long term, teams in Detroit, Ottawa, and Columbus. There may be some evidence of Pettersson scoring slightly more against weaker opposition, as one might expect most players to do, but certainly not of him piling up an excess amount of his points against them. Pettersson was worst against number one, Boston at a 0.27 point per game rate. Second was Tampa Bay at a 0.60 point per game rate. Third is Montreal at a 0.69 point per game rate. Fourth is the New York Islanders at a 0.73 point per game rate. And fifth is the Minnesota Wild at 0.75 point per game rate. There's only one long-term contender on this list in the form of the Lightning. Though the Bruins were also there a few years back, Pettersson has definitely scored less against the Eastern Conference than the Western, but most of the true contenders fall somewhere in the mushy middle of his production history, which means Pettersson has scored at a 0.85 point per game rate or higher against 19 of 31 other NHL franchises to date. He scored at a 0.75 point per game or lower against just 5 opponents. The reality is that Pettersson's point producing is more or less evenly distributed amongst his opposition, regardless of that opposition's quality. Someone with an ulterior motive can easily cherry-pick examples. They still want to believe in the myth of Pettersson feasting on weaker teams and wilting against the strong ones. They'll point to a 0.60 rate against the Lightning and a 1.45 rate against the Blue Jackets, and draw the same conclusion, that they were always going to draw anyway. But that's not the picture painted by Pettersson's entire body of work over his 7-year career. Whatever his struggles may have been, past or present, they don't seem to have much to do with the quality of his opponents. So that is the myth of EP40 piling up points against weaker opposition, or rather that is us busting, or rather Stefan Roget of Canucks Army busting the myth of EP40 piling up points against weak opposition. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of this. I will leave a link to this article in the description down below. You guys can check it out yourselves. And as always, if you guys like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want to stay up to date on all your Vancouver Canucks content, be sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a single video. You can find and interact with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook. Just search The Line Change to find our Facebook page. You can find us on Instagram at The Line Change. You can find us on X at Line Change Man. You can find us on TikTok at the TLC Podcast. You can also find us on Blue Sky at The Line Change. Feel free to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. If you prefer an audio version of this podcast, you can find us on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. On Spotify, feel free to give us a follow as well as rate and review us. It is, of course, greatly appreciated. But that's going to do it for this video. As always, let's go Canucks, and I'll see you guys in the next video.